Hello, it's time for a good old-fashioned input lag analysis. So I have had a PlayStation 5 ever since I bought it to do the Final Fantasy 16 review. And in my time using the PS5, I've decided that I really like this console. It is just an outright improvement over the PS4. It has better net speeds, which is really important if you're playing online fighting games. And it has better load times, which is really important if you're playing online fighting games. And it's just overall, I think, a better console than the PS4 in terms of what it's able to do, what it's able to output, how it performs. It doesn't look better, it looks like a scuba tank gone wrong. But other than that, I am quite a fan of the PlayStation 5. I also prefer its controller over the PlayStation 4, so I am quite pleased with my purchase. And the fact that it is so backwards compatible with the PlayStation 4's library, because for those not in the know, the PlayStation 4 is probably the greatest console of all time when it comes to the actual library of games, especially if you are into arcade games, shmups, action games. It's insane how deep the PS4 library is at this point. But the big question for today's video, and the big question I've had since I've purchased my PlayStation 5, is how well does it perform in terms of input lag when using the PS4 library? Because there's going to be a very important PS4 game released later this year, Donanpachi Daiojo Black Label by M2, and that port, among the previous M2 ports like Ketsui Detani and Battle Garega Revision 2016, are seminal and incredibly important. And then we have Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate on the PS4. So there are a ton of games that are PS4 exclusives that need to have low input lag. They need to perform as well as they do on the PlayStation 4. Otherwise, it kind of makes the PlayStation 5 a hot mess. And so the question for today's video is, well, how well do the PlayStation 4 games perform on the PlayStation 5? Can you now sell your PlayStation 4 to your friend and just stick with your PlayStation 5? What is the difference between the two? So I busted out the old input lag testing setup and I took a look at this question. I selected 4 samples to choose from. We have Ketsui Detani. I went with Ketsui Detani because it is very low lag on the PlayStation 4. And then we have Virtua Fighter 4 and Tekken 7. So we got the fighting games, see how they perform. They tend to be low lag, but not super low lag. And then I went with Metal Slug Arcade Archives port because Metal Slug, no matter how you slice it, unless you're using Run Ahead on Final Burn Neo, which I highly recommend, is a laggy game. Even on the original hardware, even if you play it on a MiSTer or PCB, it is a laggy game. So we got a laggy game in there just to see if there's a difference with that. So let's begin with Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate. Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate came out at 4 frames of input lag on the PlayStation 4. And then I compared that to Tekken 7. Tekken 7, now remember, when it came out, was a laggy nightmare on the PlayStation 4. It was hot garbage on the PlayStation 4, but over the years, they have patched it and updated it, which I do appreciate. So now Tekken 7 on the PlayStation 4 is also 4 frames of input lag, which is really good. Most modern fighting games like Street Fighter 6, for example, when they're low lag, they're going to be around 4 frames. They're not as responsive as shmups typically are. And then we bust out Metal Slug Arcade Archives, which comes out at 7 frames of input lag. And an important note about input lag on Metal Slug is that it has this nasty variable input lag because it isn't actually a 60 FPS game, it is a 30 FPS game. And so when it is ported and runs at 60 FPS through emulation, it has this weird double frame thing where it alternates. So it's going to be 7 frames and then 8 frames, 7 frames and then 8 frames. It's really weird and it messes you up when you're setting the run ahead settings until you know about this. But yeah, so it's 7 frames at the lowest and it will alternate from 7 to 8 every so often because it's Metal Slug. And then on the PlayStation 4, we did Ketsui, which, like my previous lag tests, came out at 2 frames of input lag, which is insane. And I think the lowest input lag reading I've ever seen on a PlayStation 4 game. And it is basically as good as the PCB. I think it is slightly more laggy than the PCB, around half a frame or so. But it's going to be so hard to tell the difference. This is one of the best ports of all time. And the fact that it runs so well and at such low lag on the PlayStation 4 just destroys the Xbox 360 version of this game. The PS4 version of Ketsui is the version of Ketsui. And now the moment of truth. So now I got the same games on the same hardware. So I'm using the same light, I'm using the same camera, I'm using the same controller. Everything is literally the same. I just plugged it into the PlayStation 5. The display's the same. Everything is 100% the same, identical, other than the console itself. Now let's take a look. So we go to Virtua Fighter 5, also 4 frames of lag. And had I not did different costumes, it would have been really hard for me to tell the difference because the results were just perfectly synced up. Both of them, they had the same amount of 4 frames, and yeah, it seemed to run exactly the same. It was impossible for me to tell the difference. Now let's talk about Ketsui on PlayStation 5. This is a little bit scary because of the low lag. So we're gonna see, with being so low, any little difference will show up. With Ketsui, also saw the same results, 2 frames. I was looking through, testing all these different samples. The ones you see aren't the only tests, and it just came out to be 2 frames, the same amount of little variability between the tests and everything. So again, looking exactly the same with Ketsui and with Virtua Fighter. Then let's kick over to Metal Slug. Now this is a very laggy game, so maybe if we draw out the lag, we can see the difference. Nope, exactly the same across this as well. Like I said, if I wasn't going through and making sure which result was which, it would be very hard to tell the difference. But again, 7 frames, just like Metal Slug on the PlayStation 4. And then here we get to the interesting one, which is Tekken 7. Now, Tekken 7, I did see a difference. So all the other examples, no difference at all. 1-to-1 identical from what I could tell. Tekken, however, there was a slight difference, but it's kind of odd. If we go back and look at the lag test results from Tekken 7 on the PlayStation 4, you'll notice that I am counting it as 4 frames of input lag because it is responding within 4 frames, at least the display. We're looking at the display of the input, and it's responding at 4 frames, just barely. You can see kind of the ghost of it. And this was consistent across a lot of samples, so it wasn't just this one sample. It was consistent across a lot of samples. Then we go to Tekken 7 on PlayStation 5, and when we get to the 4th frame, I couldn't see in any of the samples that ghost didn't reappear, but on the 5th frame, the whole thing appeared similar looking to the way that it looks on the PlayStation 4 samples. So there could be some explanations here. One could be that my camera simply synced up to the refresh in an interesting way on the PlayStation 4 samples, and it is actually 5 frames or more, around 5 frames. Or it could be some kind of weird difference in how the display is drawn on the PlayStation 5. Or it could be that maybe for some reason the PlayStation 5 version of Tekken 7 is slightly laggier than the PS4. I would call this kind of inconclusive because even though this was consistent across both of the samples, I am not at all confident in saying that I think it is for sure laggier. I would call this a bit of an inconsistent question mark. There could be something going on. Maybe there's some special settings for Tekken 7 on the PlayStation 5 that make it display differently or that kind of thing. But I think being that we tested all the other games and they were exactly identical, I would say that it is pretty safe to assume that in most scenarios, unless there's kind of some special things going on, that PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4 are going to have the exact same performance when it comes to input lag. But the nice part, of course, is that on PlayStation 5, you actually get better performance of these games. I was really happy to see this, and it pretty much makes your PS4, in most cases, obsolete. Adios, everyone.